If you want to succeed on social media, a great way to do so would be to create your own style of content. There's many ways to do so. It can be the way you record your videos, the way you tell your stories, or just by being within a specific niche. There's many ways to do it. Today we'll take a look at one of my favorite ways to spice up a video a little bit, which is with color grading. Note, I'm not a professional colorist, so this video is only gonna show you how I usually color my videos. So it's gonna be quite basic, so everyone should be able to follow along. I'm gonna show you some basics on how I color grade my videos within Premiere Pro today, which is kind of the simple solution. And in a later video, I'm gonna show you how to color grade within DaVinci Resolve, which I use for some more complex projects where the color grading is a huge part of the overall process. I mostly use this for professional work. So if you haven't subscribed yet, then you know where you can do so. Now, let's get started. Before you even start recording anything, you have to set up your camera to the right settings. What I recommend is to use a log profile if your camera can shoot in a 10-bit color. The rest of the features do matter, but not as much as this setting for color grading. 8-bit footage can produce 16 million colors, but with 10-bit you can produce 1 billion colors. So getting a color grade to look great without banding is way easier with 10-bit footage. A log or logarithmic profile is a flat picture profile with more flexibility. So if you accidentally mess up your exposure, you can better fix it in post, which is the biggest reason for choosing this picture profile. You do have to be aware of the fact that in most scenarios you have to overexpose the footage or expose to the right, as it's called ETTR. This is because underexposed log footage often gets grainy or noisy when you try to lift it up in post. The perfect spot is +1.7, but I tend to just keep it between +1 and +2, but not to the +2 when it's blinking, because that's just overexposed. It's easier to work with that way rather than trying to hit +1.7 every time, because daylight moves and other lighting condition moves, so it's easier just to keep it between 1 and 2. So yes, log is a little bit harder to work with, but you also get a better result when color grading. A conversion LUT for your camera or drone is usually found on the manufacturer's website. So search for S-Log free conversion LUT in Google and download the LUT from Sony's website if you of course shoot with a Sony camera like me. The same goes for your DJI drone in D-Log-M or D-Log if that's what you use. Here the name that correlates might be a bit off, but if it says D-Log-M to Rec709, it should work just fine. Once you have saved them somewhere it's easy to find again, we are ready to color grade. So let's get into Premiere Pro. Once you have opened up Premiere Pro, then start a new project. I usually use a dual monitor workspace, so I'm just gonna put it back to the essential, just so you also can follow along. So my workspace should now look very similar to your workspace. Now let's get started. First thing to do is to import some media. I have it ready here on my second monitor, so I'm just gonna import it. Okay, now that we have some footage in Premiere Pro, let's just put something down on the timeline. Let me take maybe like this clip. The way I usually tackle this kind of stuff is with adjustment layers. So let me just go back a bit and go down to this page where it says new item, press on that and choose adjustment layer. And just press OK if it matches your timeline. Now you get an adjustment layer over here, so just put it down on the timeline above your clip. What I usually do is then that I duplicate the adjustment layer just so I can have one for the color correction and one for the color grading. So you duplicate it by holding down Alt and then dragging up with your mouse or mouse pad or whatever you use. And now you get another layer exactly the same. And this works on everything. Let's say if you wanted to duplicate this layer, you just hold down Alt and left click and drag over. And now you have duplicated that layer. What I usually do then is that I give it a color. So right click, go to label, and then I usually choose forest for the lowest one, and the upper one I choose label again, and then I choose cerulean. Now on the lowest one, that's where I usually use the conversion LUT, take it and drag it over to this section over here. It'll be easier for later. And this also goes for effects and effects controls. So I'm just gonna drag them over, which will make it all a little bit easier. And Premiere Pro is really good at like customizing your pages, so that's super nice. With the bottom adjustment layer selected, go to the metric color, which we have just moved. Go under basic correction and under input LUT, click there and click browse. Now go to your location where you have put your conversion LUTs. Mine is right here. And then it's right here. Sony Look Profiles S-Log3 is Gamut 3 Cine. I use CF Express Type A cards, so I'm gonna choose this one right here. And now your clip is converted to Rec709. In here you can then do your basic adjustments. So I can see that it needs a little bit more exposure, just so we get the drone a little more clear. If we drag up the exposure, it kind of blows out the background. So I will have to drag down the highlights a bit. And maybe up with the shadows a little bit. And here I kind of like it. It might be a little bit too bright. Right around there is probably better. And I'll also have to say that I used a light which was 5600 Kelvin, and my camera was also set to 5600 Kelvin. So the light is about as good as it can be. So the temperature and tint slider shouldn't be touched. Usually I would have to adjust my clips with the temperature and tint. And you can see what happens then. Now let's go to our second adjustment layer, the adjustment layer above. This is where our color grading is gonna happen. So close the basic correction tab, because we're not gonna use that anymore, and go to your curves. Let me just preface by saying color grading is a little bit subjective, so it's more like what you feel, and how you want the footage to look. For this clip, I would like some more contrast, and the way I would do that is by using the curves. The curves work in this way where it's the lowest point is the blacks, then we have the shadows, then we have the midtones, then we have the highlights, and then we have the whites. So up here it's pure white, and down here it's pure black. And then you have the tones in between. What you usually want to do is that you want to make an S-curve. So if you click here and you click here, which is the shadows and the highlights, then you can drag down the shadows a bit. And then the shadows become deeper black, and you can drag up the highlights a bit. And now you are creating contrast between the two. So something along those lines is quite fine. Let's go down. Here you have your hue versus sat. Hue versus sat is kind of the saturation of the color in your image. So if we, for example, choose the color picker here, and then we choose the blue color here, maybe like here, then it creates a point over here where the blues are. Now, if I drag it up, it becomes more saturated. And if I drag it down, it removes all the saturation. The way I usually use the blues is that I drag them down, but that's just my look, my preferred look. And the reason for that is that I kind of like skies where the blues aren't too saturated. And that's the only way to kind of create that look. This might have been a little bit too much. Maybe like, what is this? 25%, I think. This is fine for now. The next one is the hue versus hue. Here is where you change the color of some of the other colors. So let's again choose the blue, since it's almost everything we have available here. Now, if you want to change that hue to, let's say it has to become more purple-ish, then you can drag it down to purple. This is of course quite extreme, and I probably wouldn't do it that way usually, but this is just to demonstrate how it kind of works. For my look specifically, I haven't changed that many colors. I know that I usually like to change the greens a little bit and put it up to like a little bit more of the yellow side. And if we go back to the hue versus saturation, I also kind of like to pull down the greens a bit. And this is kind of how it looks usually. Then we have the hue versus luma. If we choose the blue again, then you can see it's the luminance of the scene. So if you want the blue to become more light, you would drag it up. And if you want it to become more dark, you would drag it down. The luminance is kind of where I would say you have to be aware, because the luminance is usually kind of a thing that can crumble and fall apart. So when you're tackling luminance, especially with lower bit footage, you should be very, very aware, because as you just saw, it can easily crumble. So just a little bit here, you can see some crumbling in the spheres from the bokeh here. Kind of be aware of that. And that's also the reason why I usually don't touch it that much. Then you have the luma versus saturation, which is kind of like how saturated the light colors are. And here you can kind of see what happens. The light part kind of becomes more saturated. The only thing I kind of can recommend you to do in the luma versus sat is probably just to remove the saturation completely from the whites and completely from the blacks. Because even with a color grade on, you never actually have any kind of saturation within the all blacks and the all whites, even in movies. They are kind of left alone. Of course, when you become a more professional color grader or colorist, you of course would know how to use it and manipulate it to your liking. And then you have saturation versus saturation, but I never actually used this one, so I'm not gonna change anything here. Let's go to the color wheels and match. And this is where you kind of put in more of a look into your footage. Because here you have the shadows, the midtones and the highlights, and then you can introduce some colors into those areas. My look is usually more sandy or more like this warm tone, so I usually put in some warmth, but a lot of people also like to put in some blues. So the most used two colors in color grades in general, I think, is probably this way and this way. So more towards the warmth or more towards the cooler side. What I usually do for my look, the look I'm using right now, is that I'll go a little bit over to like the orangey yellow side in the shadows. And I'll also drag down the shadows just a tiny bit, like right around there. And one thing to really remember with color grading is that please don't overdo it. A color grade is meant to be kind of subtle. The midtones is where your skin tones usually lie, so I don't touch them that much, but I do like to introduce a little bit of some warmth, just a tiny bit. And I don't touch the slider for the luminance here. And the highlights is kind of also a space where I generally introduce a little bit more warmth. And I don't touch that slider as well. And now you can see the before and the after. So it becomes more yellowy. Yes. Then we have the HSL Secondary, which is kind of where you can choose a color and then saturate that color. Let's take another clip here. The only thing I do in the HSL Secondary is that I kind of dial in the skin tones. Then you can click this piece and it'll just show you what's being affected. And then we want to hit the skin tones. Where's the saturation? Right there. This usually takes some dialing and you'll never actually get it 100% perfect. This is kind of a fine area. So now if we remove this again, now you can go down to the correction aspect. Here I usually like to add a little bit of some saturation. You can see here I become kind of yellow, 110. I like even numbers, so I'm just gonna insert it. Then we'll also introduce a little bit of some color grading, just a tiny bit, and more towards the red side because I look kind of greenish. Maybe like 115 actually is what I usually use. Yeah, that seems more right. Basically now you actually have a look. What you can then do is that you can go up to the lumetri color, go under these three, or this burger menu is it, as it's called, and you can press right there, and then you can press export.cube, and now you can find somewhere to save it. Go away from this, remove the LUT that we have just made. Now you can go back and choose the adjustment layer that you had before, put it on top again, choose here and then go to the creative tab. Now you have something called look, and here you can choose browse, test.cube, and voila, now you have your look. The smart thing about doing this is that you can also dial in the intensity. So if it's too intense for you, you can easily just adjust it. So like maybe 70%. If you want to make it even easier for you to color grade, then I also have a LUT pack, which you can find in the description below. And the way you add that is just as I have shown you. So insert a adjustment layer right there. Go to the creative tab, choose browse. In here you have 10 LUTs that you can choose from, which is gonna show you some very different looks. So let's take Desert Desire, which is the one that I use the most. Then we go to the intensity and just dial down the intensity. And basically at like 35% is basically the look that we just made. Or maybe like more 50%-ish actually. This is the look that we just made. If we just go back a bit here to 100%, let's choose another LUT. Let's say tough teal. Then it becomes extremely blue, which some people might like. Let me just quickly show you how I would tackle a drone clip. Here I have a clip of a harbor with a sunset. So how would I tackle this clip? I would put down the adjustment layer. Then with the one below, I would go to basic correction, and then I would find the conversion LUTs again, but the D-Log M conversion LUT, because this is shot with my DJI Mini 4 Pro drone in D-Log M. So choose this one, and it already looks phenomenal. But if you want to make it even more phenomenal, go to the top layer and choose creative, and let's find a creative LUT. So let's say a touch of teal. It might need some exposure adjustment, but apart from that, chef's kiss. Then let's choose Sandy Cinema. Like, that just looks absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So this is an easy way to create some unique looks that just looks phenomenal. As mentioned in the start of my video, at a later date we'll take a look at how you color grade within DaVinci Resolve. It's a node-based system, so it's a bit harder to understand at first. So I'll try to make it as understandable as possible. But I know from experience that it takes a little more to get used to how that works, because it took me quite a long time to understand how it worked. Well, this is all that I had for you today. If you want to know more about tech, photo and video, a subscription to my channel wouldn't be a bad start. If you liked the video, leave a thumbs up below and see you in the next one. I'm out.